Sometimes I think the greatest tragedy in the universe isn't when something falls into darkness. It's when light forgets that it was once shining because of love. Lucifer, the name itself means morning star, was once the brightest among all the angels. His light didn't come from within, but from the reflection of the Creator's love. But one day, he looked at that light and whispered to himself, "It belongs to me." That was the moment pride was born, gentle as a breath, but heavy enough to shake the heavens. Theologians say the first sin in the universe wasn't murder or hatred, it was pride. Lucifer didn't fall because he was weak. He fell because he believed he was strong enough to live without God. And that's the oldest story ever told, not just about angels, but about us. Sometimes I think the greatest tragedy in the universe isn't when something falls into darkness. It's when light forgets that it was once shining because of love. Lucifer, the name itself means morning star, was once the brightest among all the angels. His light didn't come from within, but from the reflection of the Creator's love. But one day, he looked at that light and whispered to himself, "It belongs to me." That was the moment pride was born, gentle as a breath, but heavy enough to shake the heavens. Theologians say the first sin in the universe wasn't murder or hatred, it was pride. Lucifer didn't fall because he was weak. He fell because he believed he was strong enough to live without God. And that's the oldest story ever told, not just about angels, but about us. When Lucifer looked at God's throne, he no longer saw love, he saw power. And when love turns into ambition, heaven turns into a battlefield. Michael, his brother, stood before him, not with anger, but with sorrow. "Brother," he said, "freedom without love is just another kind of chain." But Lucifer couldn't hear him anymore. Once a soul falls in love with its own reflection, no truth can reach it. And so, for the first time in all creation, light divided itself. Heaven trembled, not because of war, but because of heartbreak. I've often said to my congregation, pride doesn't make you strong, it just makes you forget where your strength comes from. Years ago, I was counseling an old veteran in a nursing home in Texas. He told me, "When I was young, I thought strength meant making others obey me. Now I know strength means learning to kneel." I looked at him and said, "You just said what Lucifer never understood." He smiled, a small, peaceful smile that only comes when you've made peace with your soul. Even science tells a similar story. Neuroscientists have found that arrogance activates the same parts of the brain that crave pleasure. It feels good, but it shuts down empathy, compassion, and gratitude. The higher we lift ourselves, the further we drift from love. So, whether you call it theology or psychology, it all leads to one truth. When a soul separates from love, it builds its own hell, one brick of pride at a time. Lucifer once said, "If I cannot rule in heaven, I will build my own kingdom below." Many think that's defiance, but really, it's confession. He wasn't declaring victory, he was admitting loss. He no longer knew how to love, he only knew how to possess. That is how hell begins. Not as a punishment, but as the natural consequence of loving nothing but oneself. And that, my friend, is the same danger we face every day. Not in heaven, not in hell, but right here on earth. Because each of us carries both Michael and Lucifer inside. Some days we are faithful, some days we rebel. But that's not something to fear, that's what makes us human. God never wanted slaves. He wanted hearts that choose him freely. I once met a woman in California who lost her husband. She told me, "I hated God for taking him away. But then I realized, God didn't take him. He's keeping him safe in the place I'm going." That moment changed me. She understood what Lucifer never could. Serving God doesn't take away our freedom. It brings our love back home. So when you hear the story of Lucifer's fall, don't just see darkness. See the lesson written within it. Light cannot live unless it remembers its source. Because the truth is simple. We're not made to shine alone. We shine brightest when we reflect the one who made us. When Lucifer lifted his head, the skies were still as perfect as the day they were created. There were no storms, no thunder, no signs of rebellion, just silence. A silence that carried weight, like the calm before the birth of sorrow. Some angels looked at him, unsure, even afraid. "Brother, what are you doing?" they asked. Lucifer's voice was calm, steady, and filled with conviction. "I was not made merely to kneel," he said. And in that single sentence, heaven cracked. It was not anger that made Michael draw near. It was grief. He had sung beside Lucifer for millennia. They had built the harmony of heaven together. And now, standing before him, Michael said quietly, "You speak dangerous words, brother. Freedom without love is just another kind of prison." But Lucifer's heart was already closed. Once pride takes root, reason no longer matters. That was the moment when light itself began to split in two. People often imagine that the first war in heaven was full of fire and thunder, but I believe it was quieter than that, more human in a way. It was not a war of swords, but a war of hearts. Lucifer's army rose not out of hatred, but out of confusion. They followed him because he was beautiful, because his words sounded righteous. He promised freedom, and they mistook pride for courage. And that's how all rebellion begins, not with evil, but with the illusion of goodness. I once spoke at a church in Arizona, and a man asked me, if God knew Lucifer would betray him, why did he create him at all? I paused and then said, because love without the freedom to reject it is not love at all. The man nodded slowly. He understood that love is only real when it can be refused. And that, my friends, is the heart of heaven's tragedy. Michael didn't fight out of hatred. He fought because the universe cannot exist without order, without love as its foundation. Lucifer, on the other hand, believed that power could replace love. Two brothers, two lights of the same creation, now stood on opposite sides of eternity. Some say the battle was glorious, filled with fire and light. But I imagine it was unbearably sad. It wasn't a battle between good and evil, not yet. It was the first heartbreak in all of existence. God didn't intervene. He could have spoken a word and ended it all, but he didn't. He allowed freedom to unfold, even when that freedom tore the heavens apart. Because love never forces, love allows. That's the mystery of it all. God could command obedience, but he desires trust. He could create slaves, but he longs for sons and daughters. When Lucifer fell, his light didn't vanish. It changed color, from radiant gold to cold silver, sharp and lonely. He looked up at the heavens he had once guarded and whispered, "If I cannot rule above, I will reign below." People quote that line as if it's a threat, but to me, it sounds like heartbreak. It's the voice of a soul that no longer knows how to kneel. Hell wasn't built by God. It was built by the absence of love. It was born the moment Lucifer mistook isolation for independence. Years ago, I counseled an inmate in an Ohio prison. He asked me, "Father, what do you think hell really is?" I looked at him and said, "Hell is the place where no one loves you and you no longer know how to love anyone." He stared at the floor for a long time and whispered, "I'm already there." That moment taught me more theology than any book ever could. Lucifer was not banished to hell. He walked into it. Because in heaven there is no room for light that insists on shining alone. Michael watched him fall and whispered words that still echo across creation. Evil has not been destroyed. It has only been cast down, and that's the truth of it. Evil is not a flame that burns forever. It's a wound that refuses to heal. It lingers wherever pride replaces love. Each of us fights that same war. Every time we choose forgiveness over vengeance, we stand beside Michael. Every time we choose pride over mercy, we echo Lucifer's fall. It's not a cosmic story from long ago. It's the quiet battle that happens inside every human heart, every single day. There are no swords in this war, no thunder, no fire, only choices. And in the end, that's what defines heaven and hell. Not distance, not place, but choice. When we choose love, heaven rises within us. When we turn away from it, we descend into our own darkness. Lucifer's rebellion was the first fall. But every time a soul chooses love again, heaven reclaims what was lost. Because grace is stronger than pride. And love is eternal. The smoke cleared, the light receded. Lucifer stood among the ashes, his wings no longer radiant but scorched, blackened at the edges like a memory burning out. Above him stretched a sky without music, no choirs, no warmth, no voice calling his name, only silence. A silence so deep it felt like the weight of eternity pressing against his chest. He lifted his head and smiled, not with joy, but with defiance. "If I cannot rule in heaven," he said, "then I will build my heaven here." And in that moment, hell was born, not as a punishment designed by God, but as the tragic creation of a wounded angel, a kingdom built not from light, but from pride and pain. People often imagine hell as a place of fire, screams, and torment. But those who've truly tasted despair know the truth. Hell is quiet. It's cold, still, and lonely. Hell is the place where prayers echo back unanswered, where the soul forgets what love feels like. When I worked as a spiritual counselor for people battling depression in California, a woman once told me, "Father, I can't feel God anymore. I pray, but there's only silence." I held her hand and said, "Sometimes God is silent not because he's gone, but because he's sitting so close he doesn't need to speak." She wept, and I wept with her, because in that moment I realized God never abandons us. It is we who abandon him. Lucifer made that same mistake. He mistook silence for absence. He mistook distance for freedom. And that's how hell began, not with flames, but with forgetfulness. When Lucifer cried, "Rise, my legion," the fallen angels around him did not shout. They looked tired, uncertain. Deep down, they knew they had lost something no power could ever replace: the presence of God. I once taught a theology class in New York, and a student asked me, "If God is love, why does hell exist?" I told him, because love without choice isn't love, it's captivity. And God loves us enough to let us leave. That's why God didn't destroy Lucifer. He allowed him to live, to experience life without him, not out of vengeance, but out of respect for freedom. Hell, you see, is not a sentence, it's a consequence. Lucifer built his throne among the ruins and said, "We do not need God's light. We will make our own." And from that declaration, fire rose, but it was not divine fire. It was the fire of rage, regret, and remembrance. From that moment, he became the adversary, the enemy of light. And the cruelest part? He still longed for the light he once reflected. The Bible doesn't describe his loneliness, but I believe if you listen close, you can almost hear it. A sigh echoing through the fire, not of hatred, but of longing. The sound of a being who remembers love, but can no longer touch it. A Christian psychologist once told me, hell isn't where God isn't, it's where no one wants him to be. And that, I think, is the most accurate definition of all. We all have known a taste of hell, haven't we? Not the eternal kind, but the one that grows quietly inside, in loneliness, guilt, and unhealed wounds. Sometimes hell is not a place we go after death. It's the moment we stop believing that love can still reach us. We smile, we work, we pray, but deep inside, something has gone cold. That's where hell begins. But unlike Lucifer, we still have hope. As long as we can kneel, as long as we can whisper, "Forgive me, Lord," the light can return, not from the sky, but from within. That's the miracle of faith. Not perfection, but the courage to return. Lucifer said our war is not over. He was right. That war continues, not in heaven, not in hell, but inside every soul. Every time we choose mercy instead of anger, love instead of pride, we win a battle that Lucifer lost forever. And when we fall, because we all do, but rise again in grace, we prove that redemption is stronger than rebellion. We do what Lucifer never could. We come home. Hell began when one angel said, "I will not serve." But salvation begins when a human heart says, "Lord, I am yours." That's why every act of forgiveness, every moment of compassion, is not just goodness. It's warfare against darkness. It's heaven reclaiming what pride once destroyed. So remember, hell is not made of fire. It's made of the absence of love. And heaven begins wherever love is welcomed again. Heaven was quiet again. The smoke had faded, but the memory of rebellion lingered. Not in the stars, but in the hearts of those who had seen light and darkness touch for the first time. Michael stood at the edge of heaven, gazing into the vastness below. There was no wind, no music, only the stillness of what had been lost. Far beneath, wings of shadow moved among the flames. And somewhere in that endless abyss, Lucifer's voice still echoed, tired, wounded, but unbroken. "We will rise again. The war is not over." Michael closed his eyes and whispered, "No, brother. The war ended long ago, not by the sword, but by mercy." He turned back toward the light, realizing that heaven never needed to win, because light never proves itself by conquering darkness. It simply shines. When I was younger, I thought faith was for the weak, for those who couldn't carry life on their own shoulders. But after walking through loss, grief, and the slow passing of years, I learned something else. Faith isn't a crutch, it's a candle, the one small flame that helps you find your way when the world goes dark. That's the real meaning behind Lucifer's fall. He didn't lose because he was defeated. He lost because he forgot that light cannot exist apart from its source. Michael didn't triumph because he was stronger. He triumphed because he was faithful. Faithfulness doesn't roar, it endures. God didn't destroy Lucifer, and that's what amazes me most. He could have, but he didn't, because God never destroys what he has once loved. That's what makes him different from us. We win by overpowering, but God wins by forgiving. He doesn't crush rebellion, he outlasts it. He doesn't erase his enemies, he waits for them. When I look at the world today, torn apart by anger, pride, and endless argument, I think of that silence after the first rebellion. Heaven stood still, waiting for hearts to heal. Michael guarded the gates and Lucifer hid in the dark. And maybe, just maybe, we're still living out that story. Every time we let pride drown out love. Each day, two voices speak within us. The voice of Michael calling for peace, and the voice of Lucifer whispering for control. And the battlefield is never in the sky. It's right here, in the human heart. I remember a man I once visited in a hospital. He was dying, and he looked at me with fear in his eyes. "Father," he said, "I don't think God can forgive me." I held his hand and whispered, "He already has, long before you ever asked." Tears ran down his face, but in that moment, peace came. He wasn't a saint, he wasn't pure, but he was loved, and he finally knew it. That's the miracle of grace. Lucifer's rebellion marked the birth of sin, but humanity's story is the proof that redemption will always be stronger than sin. God never locks the gates of heaven. He leaves them open, waiting for us to say the simplest of prayers. "Lord, I want to come home." And when that happens, light doesn't just descend from above, it rises from within. Because heaven isn't a place you reach, it's a presence you remember. Hell begins when love is rejected. Heaven begins when love is chosen again. People sometimes ask me, "Do you think Lucifer could ever be redeemed?" I smile and say, if even a single spark of love remains in him, then nothing is ever truly lost. Maybe that's what God has been waiting for. Not vengeance, but remembrance. Because even the fallen once sang his name. In the end, light returns not as thunder or fire, but as understanding, quiet, gentle, eternal. Michael still stands watch over creation, and down below in the hearts of humankind, the war continues, not between angels and demons, but between pride and love. Every act of forgiveness is a victory. Every gesture of mercy rebuilds heaven, one soul at a time. The final truth is simple. The war between heaven and hell is not fought with swords, but with choices made in the human heart. Light doesn't win by destroying darkness. It wins by shining anyway. Because evil falls, but love endures.